Hi, Suchya Datta here once again, your SST teacher, and now we start with history. And here I pick up the first chapter of History Class 10, the rise of nationalism in Europe. Children, whenever there is oppression and suppression, whenever the people are actually treated cruelly, either by the home government or by a foreign power, then nationalism actually rises. And here we are going to see about nationalism in Europe in various countries. Why did it happen? How did the people react? What were the kind of government that actually came up after the rise of nationalism in Europe? Before I start with the chapter, let me give you the meaning of the difficult terms and concepts so that you understand the chapter in a better way. First of all, we must know what is nationalism. Let's break it. Nationalism, nation and ism. Children, ism, the word ism means principle. So, love for one's own country is nationalism. Now you say whether the rise of nationalism in Europe means that people did not love their country before. As I told you, it's not that. But actually it becomes strengthened when the situation is adverse. So, the love for one's own country by the people is called as nationalism. Next is absolutist. Absolutist, again the word absolute, that is something, a person who is actually despotic and whose powers are unrestricted. That is an absolutist power, which means that a king or a monarch or a person, whoever is the head, whether elected or hereditary, actually becomes very, very supreme and has all the power in one's own hand. And nobody can say anything to him is an absolutist situation. Next is utopian. The word utopian means an imaginary situation which is too difficult to be achieved in real life. It means a dream world where everyone is happy, contented, has a job, is actually very, very peaceful. That's called as utopian. This is generally the term used by the poets. Next is nation states. As the word suggests again, these are the nations, the countries which are small in size and where people feel that they are actually one. That is a nation state. Next is plebiscite. Plebiscite is when people directly vote and decide whether they want to accept or reject a proposal. Next is sovereignty. You see, sovereignty is actually a supreme power wherein you can decide everything. When a country is not independent, it is not a sovereign nation because it is not able to decide its internal and external policies. But a free nation is always a sovereign nation. That is, you are free to decide all your policies. Next is monarchy. Monarchy is in fact a kind of government where the head of the state is a monarch or a king, and generally it is a hereditary rule. Next is the Estate General. The Estate General was the name given to the French Parliament, and it was renamed as National Assembly after the French Revolution of 1789, wherein they picked up 3 watchwords: liberty, equality and fraternity. I'll continue with the terms in the next clipping. Continuing with the terms and concepts, the next term is civil code. You must remember that every nation, a free nation, has a civil code. It is in fact a systematic set of laws which are meant for everybody to follow. That is, all of us actually have to follow these rules and regulations, which is called as the civil code. Next is Habsburg Empire. Habsburg Empire was that empire, a huge empire that ruled Austria-Hungary, Austria, Sudetenland, Bohemia and Lombardy and Venetia, which were a part of Italy. Next is liberalism. Now let's cut the word liberalism. Liberalism is a Latin word and it comes from the word called liber, which means freedom and equality of law. Liberalism, meaning to say everybody has the liberty, equality, and they should feel that they are one nation and all of them are equal in the eyes of law. Next is suffrage, the right to vote to all the senior members, to the elders in the country is actually suffrage. Now what's the right to vote in India? What is the age for that? Now it is 18 years and earlier it was 21. So that right to vote being enjoyed by all the members of the society irrespective of any distinction is actually suffrage. Next is Joliveren. Joliveren was a customs union. It was a formation and organization of the customs formed in 1834 in Prussia, and this was meant to actually remove all the trade barriers. That is, they wanted a free flow of trade without any restrictions whether on export or on import. Next is conservatism. Conservatism comes from the word conservative. Conservative meaning to say those who believe in old customs and traditions. Those who do not want to change easily. Those who respect the old system. That philosophy is called as conservatism. And here, once again, when you respect, when you believe, when you are in favor of old values and traditions, you actually are a conservative. Next is Carbonari. Carbonari was a secret society which was formed in Italy, and all the young revolutionaries actually formed this society because they wanted to bring about a revolution in Germany. They wanted to bring about a revolution in Italy. Once again, it is the offshoot of nationalism which had started in Europe at that time. Next is Ottoman Empire. This was the Turkish Empire, and the head of this Turkish Empire was the Caliph. Caliph, who is believed to be the religious, political and emotional head of the Muslims. That is, whatever he dictated, whatever he said was law for all the Muslims all over the world, and that was the Ottoman Empire. I continue with more terms in the next clipping. Continuing with the terms and concepts, we have to look at more secret societies, because when nationalism starts in a country, therefore wherever nationalism surfaces, their secret societies are bound to occur. Now, young Italy was again a secret society, and this was founded by Mazzini at a place called Marseille. Next is Romanticism. Romanticism is a cultural movement wherein people try to depict their culture, their heritage, and so many things of the country of which they feel proud of. So all the parts in which you can feel pride and you try to actually awaken the feeling of nationalism of the people through culture of the country is called as romanticism. In India, if you remember, when the nationalism was going on, we also tried to revive the national movement through cultural heritage. Whether we actually gave the symbol of charkha when Gandhiji gave this forward, or such symbols which actually presented in the minds of the people the feeling that their ancient past was very glorious. Next is Das Volk. Das Volk is in fact a German word and the meaning of it is common people. That's the Das Volk. Republic. Is India a republic or not? Yes. If we look at the Constitution of India and especially the preamble, what does it say? That India is a sovereign, socialist, secular, democratic republic. And what is a republic? The republic is in fact that kind of government where the head of the state is an elected one. It's not hereditary. Next is feminist. Feminist is that movement which advocates women rights on the basis of equality of both men and women. Next is allegory. Allegory is a symbol and it is an idea by which you try to represent something else. It's an abstract idea. That's allegory. You are actually depicting something by a thing which is altogether different. And allegories are generally done to actually symbolize, to represent motherland. If I talk about India, then India as such, the motherland, what is it called as? What is the allegory? What is the symbol of it? Bharat Mata. So similarly, in Europe also, there were different allegories and you will see that whenever motherland, whenever a country has to be depicted, it is always done by a symbol of a female. Next is the Balkan region. The Balkan region was again a big region. It comprised of many countries like Romania, Bulgaria, Albania, Greece, Bosnia, Herzegovina, Serbia. And the people who inhabited these regions were called as Slavs, S-L-A-V-S, Slavs. Next is Jacobians. Jacobians were those people who contested election in France after the French Revolution in 1789. They were demanding liberty, equality and fraternity. Next is Junkers. Junkers were those landowners, big landowners who had huge land in Prussia, almost like the big zamidars of India. So, as we have the zamidars in India, they have Junkers in Prussia. These were the difficult or the new words that you needed to understand before I start with the chapter. But before I start with the chapter, in the next clipping, I am going to tell you about the 1-mark questions which can be asked from the chapter. The 1-mark questions which are generally asked and you must remember are in the chapter. First of all, what is Statue of Liberty? Statue of Liberty is in fact a female figure which signifies liberty. As I said, the allegories, the representation is of a nation is always done by a female figure. So this Statue of Liberty, I'm going to talk about this in detail in the next clipping when I talk about Soru's picture. But here you must remember that it is, when you're asking or answering just 1 mark question, it is a female figure which signifies liberty. Next is, who defeated Napoleon? You see, Napoleon had almost become invincible for the European states, and they all had become very afraid of him. Therefore, 4 nations collectively defeated Napoleon, and those 4 nations were Austria, Prussia, Britain and Russia. They all 4 gathered together to give a blow to Napoleon. Next is, name the 3 secret societies of Italy. Naturally, these secret societies were meant for revolting against the wrongs. So, those 3 secret societies were Carbonari, Young Italy and Young Europe. Next question. When was the Treaty of Constantinople signed and what was the feature of this treaty? The Treaty of Constantinople was signed in 1832, by which the nation Greece was made independent. Next is, which are the ethnic groups of British Isles? Remember, when we say United Kingdom, that means this kingdom, this country has actually come up with uniting of various states. So, which are those groups which comprise of the British Isles? They are the English, the Welsh, the Scots and the Irish. Okay. Next is national symbols. That is, what are the national symbols of Britain? But let me tell you before that, any country has national symbols like a national anthem, the national flag and the language. So similarly here for Britain, the national symbols of Great Britain are the Union Jack, which is their flag, and their national anthem, which is God Save Our King, and the English language. Next is, who was Bismarck? Bismarck is going to play a very significant role in the chapter, and here you must know that he was the chief minister of Prussia. Next is justice. How is justice depicted in the past and even today? If I just have to ask you as a layman, have you ever observed a court scene in a film? How is this justice signified? You generally see a blindfold woman who is carrying a pair of scales. So this has been the significance or the representation of justice in all the countries. And now, from the next clipping, I start on with the chapter. Before we start with the chapter, we'll talk of Frederick Soru's depiction of what was happening in Europe. Soru was in fact a French artist who painted 4 prints in 1848. And here he tried to depict what people had seen, what had actually happened, and what were they looking forward to. So this was a beautiful print, the first print that Soru actually painted, and in this he showed that the people of Europe and the people of America, they were marching forward in a long queue like a train. Many of them, the masses had come forward and they were paying homage to the Statue of Liberty. Why were they paying homage to the Statue of Liberty? Because they felt that now they had become independent, free, and could actually do what they wanted to. So they were thanking the Statue of Liberty. The Statue of Liberty at that time was actually a symbol of the French Revolution. And this Statue of Liberty was seen as a lady who had a torch of enlightenment in one hand and the rights of man and citizen, a book, a declaration on the other hand. If you remember your class 9 history, the chapter French Revolution, you will immediately recollect the rights of man and citizen which came out after the French Revolution. So here, the Statue of Liberty, when it was showing the torch of enlightenment, it meant awakening. And when it was showing the right of man and citizen, on the other hand, it showed that all the people, irrespective of all the differences, were one. Now, on the ground of the same print was a shattered remain of the absolutist regime, a lady who was lying down on the ground and the crown which was there fallen on the ground, which showed that the old absolutic monarchical government, which was cruel in nature, did not look after the welfare of the people, had now demolished, dashed to the ground. Now, the people who were marching, how did he show them? That he wanted to show that all the people in those who were marching like a train, they all belonged to different nations, but all of them were very happy. So when he wanted to show that they belonged to different nations, he showed them carrying flags of their own countries and wearing the national costume of their country. So he also painted them in their national costume and also showed them carrying the flag of their own country. Now, the people who led this march were the people of United States and Switzerland. Why? Because they had already turned into nation states, followed by France, which had just become free, which had just become a nation state. So this French artist clearly depicted that the people of France were happy, that Europe was happy because it had got liberation from the past torture of the autocratic rule of the governments or the rulers that they had. I continue in the next clipping. In this clipping, I talk about the revolution of France in the year 1789. In fact, this was the biggest revolution that occurred in Europe at that time and which gave the people liberty, equality and fraternity as the watchword. At that time in 1789, it was Louis XVI who was ruling France. He was autocratic in nature, did not bother about the welfare of the people, kept on increasing taxes on the people, wherein only the third estate, if you remember class 9, had to pay all the taxes. So there was so much of upheaval in the country that people decided to revolt against their monarch. Well, the French Revolution of 1789 saw the change of sovereignty from the monarch, that is Louis XVI, into the hands of the common people. And after this revolution, it was Louis Philippe who actually took over and he became a constitutional monarch, that is from absolute monarch to constitutional monarch, wherein his powers were restricted. But the people were yet not happy and there was a turmoil in 1848 in almost all countries of Europe as there was food shortage, and when the people revolted, the revolt was so big that the king had to flee the country. Now after this, the National Assembly was formed, that is the French Parliament, and this new National Assembly gave suffrage to all the adult males in the country. That is, all those above 21, and paid a certain kind of tax to the government. That means, again, everybody did not stand on equal pedestal. Next is, by this National Assembly, of course, a uniform language, laws and weights and measures for the country was standardized. But all these measures still could not make the people happy, and therefore there had to be more revolutions. Looking at the situation, the political situation in France, the advantage was taken up by Napoleon, who took over the reins of the government in his own hands. So once again, from a democratic government, it moved into a monarchical government. But the Jacobean clubs were formed in other countries also, because they got inspiration from the French Revolution. When this was continuing, Napoleon made himself very, very powerful in the country and also in other countries. Now Napoleon, as soon as he sat on the throne, he gave a civil code to the country, which was called as the Napoleonic Civil Code. And he gave equality to all the citizens. The right to property was also given to the people. So though the rule was monarchical in nature, but it was a welfare government. Now the people in the other countries, as they had been looking at France as to what was happening in their government, when earlier they shifted from Louis XVI to Louis Philippe and then formed the National Assembly and moving on to Napoleon, had understood one thing, that there was a political upheaval going on in France, and they too took inspiration from here. But Napoleon, when he conquered other countries and he actually had his own say there, the people of that country gave a mixed reaction to him. The mixed reaction in a sense that in the beginning, Napoleon was considered as a messenger of liberty, but slowly people became unhappy because the taxes were increased and also because other countries were being conquered. That means he did not believe in the policy of liberty, that is, giving liberation, freedom to other nations. In this clipping, we talk about the making of nationalism in Europe. Meaning to say, which were those factors which contributed to nationalism in Europe. First of all, we see that when industrialization started in Europe, there was large scale production, the income of the people increased, there was awareness, trade continued, and with all this actually emerged a strong middle class. Middle class which was educated, which was aware, which actually had money also, and which wanted to change the systems in Europe. Now with this middle class, as they had been oppressed and suppressed in the past, were looking for certain changes. And what they demanded was, first of all, a representative government for the country. That is, a government which was elected by the will of the people, and a government which would look after the welfare of the people. So a representative government was the first demand of the middle class of Europe, which had emerged due to industrialization. Now they also wanted that the old regime, the autocratic rulers, should be abolished, and it should be brought to an end, bringing in a kind of democratic government. Whatever restrictions were there on the trade, they wanted that they should be abolished. Because of industrialization, there was a lot of trading activity which was going on. So just remember, due to industrialization, the scenario in Europe changed because of the growing middle class, which was actually a class which had money and which was looking for changes. When all this was going on, there also emerged in Europe what is called as economic nationalism or liberalism. That is when Napoleon came and he gave a Napoleonic code of law, and this gave right of equality, the right to property and other changes, followed by it in other nations. And people had started becoming rich, and when they became rich and self-sufficient, they had time, energy and also the mind to change the old conservative system. When restrictions were imposed on the trade barriers, what was happening? These middle class people revolted. That is, industrialization and economic nationalism together led to a big change in Europe, that is the love for one's own country, the making of nationalism in Europe. You see, things keep on changing and things keep on coming back. That's the law of history. That is, you will see that changes do occur, but history keeps repeating itself. So then when there were people who were liberal in nature, who had actually wanted that they should come out of all the despotic and autocratic rule, and they were working hard towards it, and there had been a change in various countries of Europe. This was not liked by a set of people who had been ruling Europe in the past. And these people are called as the conservative people. And they started conservatism in Europe after 1815. Now these conservative people, they actually believed that the old regime was the best possible government that the people could have had. And then a Treaty of Vienna was signed in 1815, wherein they brought about such changes in the map of Europe that it actually reached where it was earlier, whether it was in the state of government or in the redrawing of the territories of the European countries. In France, we see that after the Treaty of Vienna, it was decided that the Bourbon dynasty, you remember King Louis XVI, who belonged to the Bourbon dynasty, this Bourbon dynasty was restored in France. So once again, they have moved back from the old government that they had shifted to a new kind of government. Again, they had to move back. And all the annexed states which were actually annexed by Napoleon were liberated, were restored. This Treaty of Vienna was actually meant for restoring monarchy in Europe. You see how things are continuing? We are seeing that due to industrialization and the economic nationalism that we have seen, people had moved a step forward of creating a democratic government, but have moved back due to the Treaty of Vienna, when actually the conservatives rose to power once again. Most of the states which were formed now and the government which were there were autocratic in nature. They started ruling the people in the same savage ways that they had been doing earlier. Naturally, as I said, history keeps repeating itself, because the people were unhappy with the old regime, so they had revolted, and there had come in a new setup of government, which was a welfare government, again restored by the monarchies. So these monarchies had once again to be overthrown. So the process started, and actually we see that the field work was started by the revolutionaries of different countries. The first step of this was actually started by Giuseppe Mazzini, about whom I have already told you that he started with 3 secret societies in Italy. That is the Carbonari, the Young Italy and Young Europe, who started working against the government which was autocratic in nature. Following the example of Mazzini, other countries of Europe, wherein also the old regime, autocratic government had been restored, started setting up secret societies. And those governments or those countries were Germany, France, Switzerland and Poland. Metternich said that Mazzini was in fact the most dangerous enemy to the present state of government. So you see, this is the making of nationalism in Europe, which you must quickly revise by saying that due to industrialization there came about economic revolution in the country, growing up of the middle class, which asked for demands to liberate themselves, followed by conservatism or followed by the conservative rule and followed by autocratic rules and setting up of these secret societies. This was all about the making of nationalism in Europe. I continue with the rest of it in the next clipping. The age of revolution, that is 1830 to 1848, this period is called as the age of revolutions in Europe. Now it so happened that a revolution started in a country, that is France, which was followed by other countries of Europe. Taking an example from this nation. So when so many revolutions occurred in this particular period, this age is termed as the age of revolutions. So what is the age of revolutions that we talk of in Europe? That is the year between 1830 to 1848. In this period, first of all, the Bourbon dynasty, which had been ruling France for so many years, was overthrown by actually giving death to Louis XVI and his wife Marie Antoinette. Now this Bourbon dynasty, when it was overthrown, it gave a jolt to other nations of Europe. And it was said that when France sneezes, the rest of Europe catches cold. Meaning to say, whatever happens in France, the effect of it could be felt in other nations of Europe. So when the Bourbon dynasty was overthrown, the other dynasties, the ruling dynasties of Europe actually became frightened that now the people are going to pick up arms against them. And of course, it did actually throw an impact on the common people. Now here we see that when all this was going on, they started the Greek War of Independence, wherein the people of Greek were wanting independence, liberation, followed by a long struggle, and ultimately the Treaty of Constantinople, which was signed, gave freedom to Greece. Now, when all this is going on, you have to remember that there are certain people, certain ideas, certain images, symbols which make up revolutions. And here the most significant is Romanticism. Romanticism, as I told you in the new words and concept also, that when we try to actually depict our past, our culture, our folk songs, our folklores, our language and other such identities as something very important, then we connect it to the nationalism. We connect it to the revolution that we are fighting against the autocratic government. So this romanticism played a great role in actually giving a feeling of unity and a feeling of pride in the old past heritage that the people had. The best example of it is when in Germany das Volk became a significant word. That is the common people. They wanted that the common people should actually be the symbol, be the power behind all the governments. When all this was going on, in the year 1830, Europe saw a great economic hardship. When hardships were going on economically, it meant unemployment was increasing. It meant that people did not have sufficient to eat. That meant that there was agricultural depression. That meant that industrially they could not pick up. And in 1848 in France, the biggest picture that came forward was that when France was undergoing such an economic stagnation, their unemployment had increased, food shortages were there, the people actually marched forward and they revolted against the present king. If you remember, from Louis XVI, they had actually placed Louis Philippe on the throne, who was not an absolute monarch, but who was a constitutional monarch. When people revolted here, that means again the other countries of Europe had become alarmed. The weavers in Silesia also revolted against the contractors in 1845. That is, they demanded better money. They wanted that they should be given better opportunities, better working conditions. And when all this was happening, they even threatened their contractors and sometimes entered their houses and destroyed the luxurious houses that they had. And most of the contractors had to flee from their place, and when they asked and demanded shelter in the neighboring areas, they were denied. Of course, the after effect of it was seen on the weavers themselves, who were shot, but all this was to show that the people of Europe now were ready to pick up arms against any kind of autocracy or any kind of injustice which they would, if ever, face. Therefore, this age is called as the age of revolution. That is, the people were revolting not only against their present autocratic kings, but against their own employers, against their own landlords, against their own people who actually had turned autocratic in any manner. They also started with a revolution of the liberals. Now this liberalism is actually connected with the middle class. As I told you earlier, the middle class which had emerged was very liberal in nature. It was such a kind of government that they were looking for, wherein everybody was equal in the eyes of law. But these liberals could not continue with their revolution and their set of government for a very long, because the conservatives overpowered them. So this upheaval, this confusion, chaos which was prevalent in Europe during 1830 to 48, when people were setting up democratic government and again restoring the old regime and then again coming back to the new form of government by various factors, people actually is called as the age of revolution. I continue with the rest of the chapter in the next clipping. When we are talking about the rise of nationalism in Europe, it cannot be completed unless we talk about the German unification and the Italian unification. So let's talk about the German unification. You see, by all the efforts that the people had made, by 1848 they had not been able to place constitutional monarchy in their country. They still had the old regime, the old kind of government in their country. What had happened? It was realized that now Prussia has to become the leader of the movement and has to bring about the German unification. And the efforts were all made by Otto von Bismarck, who was the Prussian chief minister. He had realized that unless he does not fight, and he will not be able to bring about the unification. So he fought 3 wars in 7 years. That is, the Prussian army fought 3 wars in 7 years against Austria, Denmark and France, and liberated all the places which were under them, all the areas which were under them, which they had conquered, and liberated them, and thus came about the unification of Germany. So all the credit goes to Bismarck for German unification. Simultaneously, we have to talk about the unification of Italy. Now, history of Italy has been the history of political fragmentation. That is, it has always been a land of small political fragmentations. Here, Italy was actually divided into 7 states, and only Piedmont and Sardinia, that is the 2 of them, were under an Italian king, and rest of them were either under a Bourbon dynasty or were under Austria. Therefore, the need was to free them and bring them under Italy. Therefore, the biggest effort that was made was by the 3 great people of Italy, Mazzini, Victor Emmanuel II and Garibaldi. All 3 of them had different contributions towards the unification of Italy. Mazzini, as I have always been stressing in the chapter, and you all know by now, that he had made 3 secret societies, and he started preparing a revolutionary army against the aristocracy. Therefore, he was responsible for the secret societies, whereas Victor Emmanuel II, he had an alliance with France. He played a great diplomatic tact, and he entered into a secret alliance with France and defeated Austria in the year 1859. Thus, it also gave a great boost to the unification of Italy. Here we must remember that Victor Emmanuel II was already made the king of United Italy in 1861, even before the actual completion of Italian unification. The third and very important member was Garibaldi. Now, Garibaldi was a very young and active member of Young Italy, an association, a revolutionary wing which had been formed by Mazzini. And because of the threat that he was getting from the government, he had to flee the country. But again, he made a comeback, and he started with a volunteer army. That is, those who themselves wanted to join the army, which was called as the Red Shirts. And thus, he freed the government, or he freed the territories from the Bourbon dynasty with the help of the Red Shirts. I talk about the rest of the chapter in the next clipping. The Balkan region in Europe has been a problem area for many reasons. So let's understand in detail about the Balkan region. First of all, the Balkan region comprises of modern-day Romania, Bulgaria, Albania, Greece, Macedonia, Croatia, Bosnia-Herzegovina, and the people who inhabit these land are called as Slavs. So first thing you must know that which country comprise of the Balkan region and what are the people called as. This region was for many years under the Ottoman Empire. Remember the Ottoman Empire? The Ottoman Empire is the Turkish Empire led by a caliph. So it was under whom? Under the Ottoman Empire. Now here, when the Ottoman Empire started disintegrating and it started becoming weak, naturally the people of these areas, they were filled with the spirit of nationalism. That is, now they wanted to free themselves from the clutches of the Ottoman Empire. This led to intense chaos and confusion in the region, because all the countries now suddenly wanted to become independent, and they did start breaking up one by one. When this process was going on, and we see that the head, that is the Ottoman Empire, had become weak and there had started colonialism in Europe, naturally the advantage was taken up in this intense conflict by Russia, Germany, England and Austria-Hungary, who wanted to have their own positions, who wanted to have their own hold in the Balkan region. Because Balkan region is very strategically located. Now here, because of all this conflict which started off, that is new countries of Europe wanting to have a hold in Balkan, led to Balkan wars, which later on turned into a factor for the First World War. So remember, the Balkan history is very simple. Quickly you must say that these modern day Romania, Bulgaria, Albania, Greece, Macedonia, Croatia, Bosnia-Herzegovina comprises of Balkan region. People are called slaves. There the hold was under the Ottomans, who became weak, which led to the demand of becoming independent by the nations. And when this confusion was going on, the chaos became confounded, because Russia, Germany, England and Austria-Hungary wanted to have a hold here due to the strategic position of the Balkans, leading to the Balkan wars and ultimately becoming a factor towards the First World War. I continue with the remaining of it in the next clipping. At the beginning of the chapter, we spoke about the female allegories, and we spoke of the Statue of Liberty, wherein she was holding a torch of enlightenment in one hand and the man and citizen declaration on the other hand. But there are few other allegories which you must remember before we sum up with the chapter. The next one which you must know is the Allegory of France, which was a lady named Marina, which is a popular name in France. She was symbolized by red cap. Red cap is a symbol of when a slave becomes free, he wears a red flag, and the tricolor, which actually meant that the people were now liberated of the clutches of the old regime and they could live their life in the manner that they pleased. The figure of Marina was placed and erected in public squares and in coins to remind the people that they are now a liberated nation. So the allegory of France was Marina. Next is Germania. Germania was a symbol or allegory of Germany. Now here, this lady is actually wearing a crown of oak leaves, because the German oak stands for heroism. So, the people of Germany were actually taught that they should have bravery in them, they should have the qualities of leadership, and they should be able to liberate themselves against all the odds. So, Marina in France and Germania in Germany. But you must also remember another such depiction, and that is Britannia, wherein Britain was shown sitting on the globe on all the nations, and the angels holding the banner of freedom. This depicted that England or Britain was a very powerful country, and all other countries of Europe were connected to Britain directly or indirectly. You know, one of the very famous poet also said that the sun never sets in Britain. Such was the powerful nation Britain at that time. And they depicted this in Britannia when they said that they were sitting on top of all the nations and the other nations are all connected to them. That was all about your chapter, The Rise of Nationalism in Europe. Thank you.